Good evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Joey Chen. What the CIA did in response to 9/11, as we learned from the new Senate report, is nothing short of shocking. The brutality described in the hundreds of pages, far worse. The lies to Congress and the nation, far more serious than anyone suspected. Not only that, but the bitter truth, the report concludes, is that the torture was pointless. It didn't stop a single plot. And while the CIA claims it helped to track down Osama bin Laden, in the end, it produced little intelligence of value. We begin tonight with Al Jazeera contributor Lindsey Moran, who is a former CIA officer, on what led the agency down such a torturous path.
We also have to work the dark side, if you will. We've got to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world.
It was that remark by then Vice President Dick Cheney, made just days after the 9/11 attacks, which came to define how the Bush administration would conduct the war on terror. At the time, the notion of going to the dark side raised few eyebrows. With the wreckage at the World Trade Center still smoldering, few Americans were in the mood to ask questions.
After 9/11, the country was still in somewhat of a fog as to the scope of al-Qaeda's threat.
Bruce Fein was a Justice Department official under President Reagan. He's been a critic of America's detainee policy.
We have this al-Qaeda group attacks the United States of America. We will get them, we will crush them. And that was captured in part by President Bush's statement in the immediate aftermath of the attacks that you're either with us or against us.
Less than a month after 9/11, the war in Afghanistan started. Looking for a place to imprison captured Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters, the Bush administration quickly settled on the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Guantanamo Bay has a curious legal status. It's not part of the sovereign territory of the United States, and the idea was if we're detaining prisoners on territory that's not sovereign in the United States, then our federal judges wouldn't be able to issue what's so-called writs of habeas corpus, which would permit the detainees to challenge the legality of their detentions.
So it's kind of like a legal no man's land.
That's a twilight zone, if you will.
The Bush administration saw Gitmo as more than just a prison camp. Secretive and out of the way, it was also an ideal place to interrogate suspected terrorists. The first detainees arrived in January of 2002. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld paid a visit to the base that month.
The Al-Qaeda is not a country. They are a terrorist network, and it would be a total misunderstanding of the Geneva Convention if one considered Al-Qaeda, a terrorist network, to be an army.
Rumsfeld's view that the detainees weren't entitled to the protections afforded prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions was ratified by the Department of Justice and by the White House. That was the first of several major decisions, which many believe led directly to the abuse and torture of detainees. In December of 2002, the Bush administration made another big decision regarding the detainees. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld authorized several interrogation methods so harsh they're normally forbidden. At the bottom of his memo, Rumsfeld questioned why making the detainees stand in stress positions for more than 4 hours was off limits, saying, "I stand 8 to 10 hours a day." In questioning detainees, the CIA had already been using several controversial interrogation methods, including confinement in a box, sleep deprivation, and waterboarding, a technique in which the subject is made to feel as if they're drowning. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-professed architect of 9/11, was waterboarded 183 times. Another al-Qaeda operative, Abu Zubaydah, was waterboarded 83 times.
These enhanced interrogation techniques were modeled after what the Chinese used during the Korean War against U.S. Air Force officers to elicit false confessions. It shows you the craziness that happened after 9/11.
So what kind of twisted legal maneuvering took place within the Bush administration that ultimately led to a justification of the enhanced interrogation techniques and methods?
We need to begin with the baseline, is that we had laws that prohibited torture. And the argument was made, no, the intent of these enhanced interrogation techniques isn't to inflict serious physical harm or mental suffering, it's to get an answer to a question.
In 2003, the culture at Gitmo made its way overseas. Late that year, Jeffrey Miller, the general in charge of the Gitmo detention facility, traveled to Iraq. There, he began training the American soldiers running the notorious Abu Ghraib prison. Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan was yet another prison where detainees were held, sometimes with fatal results.
Right now, there are 8 known cases of deaths that have happened of detainees in Afghanistan, and all of those cases are being investigated or have been investigated to some degree or another.
Nonetheless, the harsh treatment of the detainees went largely unnoticed. That is, until April of 2004.
It was this picture and dozens of others that prompted an investigation by the U.S. Army.
It was 60 Minutes, along with the New Yorker magazine, which broke the news about Abu Ghraib. These images of American soldiers abusing detainees horrified the world. Here's another item from 2004. It's an email, one of several sent by FBI agents to their superiors, about what they saw at Guantanamo Bay. I entered the interview rooms to find a detainee chained hand and foot in a fetal position on the floor, with no chair, food, or water, writes the agent. The detainee was almost unconscious on the floor, with a pile of hair next to him. He had apparently been pulling his own hair out throughout the night. Facing a backlash, President Bush was forced to defend his administration against accusations of torture, not just at Abu Ghraib and Gitmo, but at CIA black sites around the world.
And when we find somebody who may have information regarding a potential attack on America, you bet we're going to detain them. And you bet we're going to question them.
In 2007, Bush issued an order allowing the CIA to continue using many harsh interrogation methods, with the exception of waterboarding.
Protect them. That's our job.
In January 2009, in one of his first acts as president, Barack Obama signed an order to ban the use of torture and to close the Guantanamo Bay prison.
There we go.
Today, the prison continues to operate, still holding 136 detainees.
Lindsey Moran rejoins us here on the set. Lindsey, given your experience in the CIA and what you saw in this report, I mean, does anything that you saw here surprise you?
Nothing surprised me. I have to say I was a little bit saddened by some aspects when Dianne Feinstein was giving the executive summary, because she refers to a number of CIA officers who voiced questions about the program.
Concerns,
questioned its efficacy, and indicated that all of those concerns were kind of swept under the carpet. They were really silenced. And that really brought me back to a time, to what it's like to work for that organization. I left the agency in 2003.
So right in the midst of all of that.
Right in the midst. And I certainly was not privy to details of what was going on at Guantanamo beyond what was sort of talked about in kind of hushed tones in the hallways. And, you know, I remember a friend telling me so-and-so's back from Guantanamo and bragging about what we're doing to these guys down there. And I just remember thinking, I'm so glad I'm on my way out of here.
Let's talk further about this now. Joining us here is Colonel Col Kleinman, former senior interrogator in both Iraq wars. You've also been a senior intelligence officer yourself. You understand a lot of what's been happening here, and you've been concerned and critical about these programs. I guess the brunt of this is, after everything we've learned about these programs, did they even work?
Well, I think this report lays out very graphically that they don't work. And if they do, it's sporadic and unreliable. And it's so morally reprehensible that there would have to be some fundamental operational relevance to even go there, but it's not. And the fact that not only the brutality, but the ineffectiveness had been hidden from us is just inexcusable.
We see what we see in the movies.
Right.
We see that an interrogation is a tough thing. It's a tactic. You got to be hard. You may have to be brutal to get the answers that you want. Does it go against what we really believe to think that there's any way to do this except to be as hard on the bad guys or the guys you think are the bad guys as possible?
Frankly, I think all the hand-wringing at the agency about the release of this summary, while they said it was because, you know, they were afraid it would put CIA operatives or agents at risk, I really think it was that it debunked this kind of lifeboat that they've been clinging to, that this was effective. We had to do this. We had to do this to keep Americans safe. And the summary suggests that, no, we didn't have to do it. And in fact, it was a colossal waste of time, greatly degraded our standing in the world.
What's going to happen now?
We need to move interrogation into the 21st century, just like we have with signals intelligence and imagery. And this is an opportunity to do so.
So what's it going to take to do that?
That's an excellent question, and the good news is, while we spend billions on signals intelligence and imagery, now this one thing that this paper has said, that interrogation, and the defenders of this program, interrogation is absolutely essential to national security. Let's spend $5–10 million a year on research to understand and keep refining our craft.
But if the senior leader of ISIL is picked up today, what kind of interrogation is he going to get?
My suggestion, you talk to Mark Fallon, Ali Soufan, Bob McFadden, so many of my colleagues who have done that. They have talked to terrorists over and over again very effectively and never once threatened them.
And gotten the answers.
And they got the information, absolutely. And the fact that they got information is well documented, because a lot of those people are in prison now.
I think part of the problem is the American public has kind of been sold on this mythical idea that there's a detainee who has some kind of ticking time bomb information, and that in order to get that out of him, you have to torture him. And it's, you know, it's farcical, it's unrealistic. But I think a large part of the American public has bought into that, and that's in part because the CIA had made that case for many years. As a human collector of intelligence, you're not trained to interrogate. We don't really know the science behind interrogation. We are trained kind of to get more bees with honey, to make friends with people, to build bonds and rapport. And that has consistently been proved to be the most effective way of getting someone to give you what you want, which is information.
And just to underscore the point to our viewers, both of you have worked extensively in intelligence. You've seen it firsthand. Appreciate both of you being with us. Former military interrogator Steve Kleinman, also Al Jazeera contributor, and former CIA officer Lindsey Moran. Thanks very much.